This is Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Voyage. I am your host, Frances Hogan. Welcome to our sharing on the book of Exodus. We are now going into chapter 16 of the book of Exodus and the wonderful story of the manna, which is very deep if you really look into the meaning of the term. If you go to the book of Numbers, chapter 33, you will be given all the stages of the Exodus. And I'm not going to read it all for you, but you will realize that many of the stages of the Exodus are not actually mentioned in the book of Exodus or in the book of Numbers. They only mention those stages where the people had difficulty, where they had struggles, and how God actually responded to them. So if you look into the book of Numbers, chapter 33, I want to begin at verse 9 and just read a small bit for you. And they set out from Marah, that was the place where they had the bitter waters, and they came to Elim. Now that's chapter 15, okay? And at Elim there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there. That's the very end of chapter 15. And they set out from Elim and encamped by the Red Sea, which is not mentioned at all in the book of Exodus. They set out from the Red Sea and encamped in the wilderness of Sin, or Zin, depending on the translation, either Z or S. And this is where we pick up in the book of Exodus here. And then they had other encampments before they actually arrived at Sinai. Now, an encampment means that they simply settle down for the night or settle down for a day or two or a week or whatever. Okay, so what I want to do is read a bit of this for you because there is a flow in the story. And if you get the flow of the story, then I'll go back and comment on this and then try and bring you into what the rest of the Bible actually says about it, which is actually quite important. So from Elim, they set out again, and the whole community of the sons of Israel reached the wilderness of Sin, or Zin, depending on your translation. So it was between Elim and Sinai. You're going to discover very soon they're almost at Rephidim, which is very important when we get to chapter 18. So the whole community, is at least 2 million people. So this is a massive migration. And in recent times where we've had people migrating from one country to another, we've seen the effect of that migration on the countries that they actually pass through or enter into. So this is a major event. 2 million people is something even moderns couldn't handle. And verse 2 says, the whole community of the sons of Israel began to complain. Now, it's one thing for a family to complain or the neighborhood, but to have 2 million people complaining is a problem. It doesn't matter who you are. And I want you to hear the word complain. It's going to turn up at least 7 times. They began to complain against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and they said to them, why did we not die at Yahweh's hand in the land of Egypt, when we could sit down to pans of meat and could eat bread to our heart's content? They've completely forgotten they were slaves. They couldn't eat to their heart's content as slaves. No way. But notice, the problem is food. And so imagination has taken over because they're hungry. And they think the food of slavery is better than the freedom of redemption. That's the big problem on the higher level. As it is, they said in verse 3, you, that is Moses, have brought us here to this wilderness to starve this whole company to death. Would you like to be Moses? The more I read about this story, the more I realize why Moses told God back at the burning bush that he didn't really want the job. I wouldn't want it either, would you? To have 2 million people on your back and they're complaining and they're dragging their heels and they're making problems the whole way along. Who'd want that job? Now notice the you to the Moses. They have completely forgotten that God is actually with them, that God manifests his presence to them in the pillar of cloud and in the pillar of fire at night. He has already worked miracles for them. huge miracles that the world is still talking about, like the crossing of the Red Sea, like the 10 plagues of Egypt. He's done all of that, and they have completely forgotten. It's all obliterated because I'm hungry. Now, what you see there is the body taking over from the soul, and the temporary from the eternal, and the material from the spiritual. That's the crisis, that they have descended right down. They're not using their heads, they're not thinking. Why couldn't any of them have said to God, "Give us this day our daily bread"? Never occurred to them to ask God. He only made the world, you know. He made everything that's in it. And he's going to show them that he's God again. And he has to keep showing them all these signs all the time. The Lord said to Moses, "Now I will rain down bread for you from the heavens." And he meant it literally. I mean, how big can the miracle get? Each day, the people are to go out and gather a day's portion. I'll show you in the commentary later just what that day's portion actually meant. I propose to test them in this way to see whether they will follow my law or not. And on the sixth day, when they prepare what they have brought in, it will be twice as much as the other days. Why? Because they have to rest on the Sabbath day. Moses and Aaron said to the whole community of the sons of Israel, "In the evening, you will learn that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning, you will see his glory." Now, if you use fancy religious language to people who are hungry, they are going to come up with some kind of an incredible thing that God is going to manifest himself in some kind of a dramatic way. He did actually. He sent them the manna, but they didn't think that was his glory, and they didn't think that was a wonderful manifestation. Just as people today don't think that the manifestation of God in the Eucharist is great, that it is a daily miracle, and it's straight from heaven. We're spiritually blind. So, I want you to hear the complaining bit before I give you any commentary. Moses and Aaron said to the people, "And in the morning you will see his glory." For number 2, he has heard your complaints against him. It's not against us you complain. For what are we? I mean, we can do nothing. We're hungry as well. Moses said, "In the evening, God will give you meat to eat. And in the morning, to your heart's content, you will have food, bread." Now, the book of Exodus doesn't deal with the quails that God sent to them in the evening. That story you will find in the book of Numbers in chapter 11. Why they separated the two is because there were different things to learn from the manna and from the quails, and they committed different sins as well. So it's not against us you complain. He said, "In the evening, yes, you will have the meat, and in the morning you will have bread to your heart's content," because this is the 4th time the Lord has heard your complaints against him. Number 5, your complaining is not against us. And it goes on and on about your complaints 7 times. Okay, don't you think that's a bit of a problem? Don't you think God is having a problem with these people? Yep. Okay, let's see where the problem starts. We left them in chapter 15 at Elim, a place where there was plenty of water and there was 70 palm trees. That oasis in the desert is still there geographically to this very day. And it was the place where nomadic people in the wilderness would actually gather to be able to get their supply of water and to rest and all the rest before going on to their next place. But we're now dealing with the instinct of the human race. And that is that when you get a time of rest, you want to stay there. You don't want to go on. But Elim was not their destiny. Their destiny was the promised land. And the whole story of the Exodus, which I've told you before, is actually a prophetic forecasting of the whole spiritual journey of the human race back to God. Our destiny is in heaven. It's not on the earth. And so if we settle down just for comfort and security and everything the world can give us, you're not going to get there. So God has to let things happen to you to bring you into discomfort so that you will shift from just being on a lower plane and start living on the higher plane of a spiritual life, a life of union with God. As they shift from Elim into the deeper stages, which I have mentioned, Numbers 33, and they arrive at this place in the wilderness, they are now actually, for the first time, completely engulfed by wilderness. Now, I actually have compassion on them because if you've been in a wilderness where there is nothing, there is no food, no water, no nothing, we won't behave an awful lot better than them. We wouldn't. So they cannot stay in this comfortable place because it means they won't ever achieve their destiny. They must go deeper into the wilderness. And God has to do that with all of us, that He has to insist that we go deeper in life. So you have to come out of your comfort zone and allow Him to challenge you and bring you into this deeper place. And the full rigors of the wilderness are now upon them for the first time. He's brought them gently, piece by piece, to this point. Now, if they had learned their lessons all along the way, there wouldn't be a problem. But they're not good at learning lessons. Most of us aren't. And so they've arrived here having had various experiences, and they're none the wiser. And because they're none the wiser, they're going to fall into traps all the time. What God has done is He has brought them further and further away from what is called normality, whatever that is. All of us have something in our heads that says this is normal and this isn't. And He has to shift us away from our own definitions of whatever normality is, or to get out of your comfort zone so that He can get you to think. He can get you to make deeper decisions. He can get you to grow in wisdom. He can get you to grow in understanding. And most of all, grow in union with Him. That's the important thing. So once they arrive at the place where they are completely engulfed by the wilderness, they're in a position where only God can help them now. He has worked mighty miracles for them in Egypt, at the Red Sea, up to this point, and at no stage did they, as a community, turn to become a praying people, a people who would actually communicate with God. They don't do that. Even though He has done all of this for them, they do not give their hearts to God. They don't do it. They do not convert. They don't give themselves to Him. He's giving Himself to them all the time, all the time, all the time. They don't give themselves to Him. So the most basic thing in religion is missing, and that is a relationship with God. Now, Moses has it, and to a lesser extent, Aaron has it. The rest of them, no. They act like petulant children, making demands all the time. And one of the problems throughout the history of this people is that they demand miracles from God all the time. So when you go down to the gospel, you will find Jesus saying that He doesn't accept that someone would believe because of a miracle. You have to believe for a completely different reason. You have to believe on the person of the Lord Himself. And that was one of the struggles that Jesus had, was to try and get this people to actually believe, as distinct from, yes, I believe because He healed my mother, or He healed me, or whatever. That temptation to believe just because you see some physical evidence is still with us. And many people today still demand miracles in order to believe. You remember that after the resurrection, when Thomas met Jesus in the upper room, that Jesus said to him, Thomas, you believe because you've seen. Blessed are those who have not seen and have believed. That means that Thomas's own congregations, the people who would believe because he gave the testimony, that they were going to be greater than him. If you only believe because you see, that faith is very, very low. The real faith is to trust God beyond reason within your innermost being, and to enter into that relationship with Him in which you allow God to be God. And if we allow God to be God, then it doesn't matter how weak or frail or needy we are, because God will supply. And He has shown them already that he wants to be father and provider and guide and teacher and healer and absolutely everything. So even though he has a crowd of children who are being very unruly and very petulant, he's still going to show them his greatness. So Moses had already spent 40 years in the wilderness before all of this actually happened. So he understood the absolute need, and I'm underlining this because of all that is coming down in history to us at this particular time. Huge chastisements coming to us, huge persecution of the church coming to us. We have to be ready. The absolute need to rely on God to supply all your needs. The absolute need for a personal prayer life. Even supposing, God forbid, the entire church reneged on everything, that I would believe. I'm not believing because of them. I'm believing because of him. And this is the issue, that people would develop a personal relationship with God. And they did need miracles for their survival in this vast and terrible wilderness. And so God would supply them. And you're going to see that now also. Moses knew that God, of course, was great enough to deal with all of this. It's nothing to him. God created the universe just by wanting it. Let there be light, and there was light. Let us create man in our own image, and that was the reality. So since God is the creator of heaven and earth, since he's the creator of all plants and all animals and everything that exists, nothing is a problem to him. And the scriptures are dotted with statements that nothing is impossible with God. In the Old Testament, they say, is the arm of the Lord too short? The angel Gabriel said to our Blessed Mother in Luke 1:38, nothing is impossible with God. Jesus said, when he was teaching the people himself, I think it's in Mark, that for those of you who believe, nothing is impossible. He said, you could even tell this mountain to move and it'll move. So what you have here is a refusal to believe, even though God has done so much for them. But in this whole situation, we see Moses for the extraordinary person that he really is. Now, don't forget that this is about 1,500 years before Christ. So that's 3,500 years ago. It's amazing. Now, some people would challenge the 500, but never mind. That's because they challenged the dates of the Exodus. Moses' faith was even greater than Abraham's. We're told that Abraham was justified by trusting in God in Genesis 12. But Abraham was believing God for himself and for his family. Moses was believing God for an entire nation, which is a different subject altogether. So in this crisis, what we're going to see is the extraordinary grace and love of God coming to a people who are petulant, refusing to believe. They are sinful and rebellious. And so the hero of the whole story is God, that his mercy and his love and his grace is poured out on a people who absolutely don't deserve it. Now, am I saying something against the chosen people? And the answer is no. Because the entire scriptures were given to us to show what the human race is like. We are no different to them. And these lessons are given to us so that we would learn from them and know what is the correct response to give to God. So if you want to experience God's miracles in your life, just simply open up to him. That's all. Very simple. If I want light, I've got to do something to bring the light on. It's very simple. There's no complication about it. So against a background of sinfulness, you see his extraordinary mercy. It's the light in the darkness. And so in their hunger, they panic and they let the imagination take over. And because they let the imagination take over, they think that the food they got during their slavery was better than the starvation they're having now. It's very interesting. People living a spiritual life go from a comforting time at the beginning to a testing time. The testing time is the wilderness. All of us have to go through the wilderness. Doesn't matter whether you like it or whether you don't, because God wants to bring you to your destiny. And so we have to go through the wilderness. And so we don't like letting go of the comforts of the past. We don't like the challenges we're going through now, but it's the challenges you're going through now are more important than the comforts of the past, because in the comforts we don't grow. In the challenges we do grow. And it's in the challenges that we make our decision for or against God and life and growth and wisdom and everything. So it's the challenges that God sends to us that are the very important things. But the amazing thing is that when the challenges come, we are very quick to forget what God has done for us in the past. And we're very quick to say, how can God be a good God and do that to me? Very quick to challenge him, very quick to accuse. It's absolutely amazing. But when you move further on in the spiritual life, past this wilderness into union with God, then it is completely different, totally different. Just in passing, I want to say to you that life itself offers you good, better, and best. The good is this Elim that you really enjoy. The better is this ability to grow spiritually. Much better. And we find it very difficult to let go of the good for the better. And then when God is offering you union with him through a period of purification, we find it very difficult to let go of the better for the best. And so I just would remind you that Saint Therese of Lisieux said that we should come to God with empty hands every day, absolutely open to him, not clinging to the past, not clinging to whatever we think is normality, but allowing God to be God, and therefore he brings you to the height of glory. How they never thought of asking God to do something for them is utterly amazing. And how they accused Moses, you did this. You brought us here to die in the wilderness. Now that tells you, you see, the focus is wrong. The focus is on the human. They're not looking at God at all. It was God who brought them to this place. Moses was simply God's servant. He was simply obeying God's instructions. That's all. And so it was God who brought them here, but they won't acknowledge it. Now, many people, even good Christians today, find it difficult that there's no coincidences in life, that God allows things to happen to us, allows us to meet people, and so on and so forth, allows events to occur because they are right for us at that moment for us to move forward and to go on into a deeper relationship with him. And as we go deeper into the wilderness, poor Moses gets more and more and more accusations against him. You did this, you want to kill us here, you want to starve us, you want to do this. It's unbelievable. And Moses has given up his own personal life to help them. He has sacrificed his entire family life to help them. He has been their teacher, their guide, their intercessor, their miracle worker. He's the one who has built them up. He has done absolutely everything for them, and he gets zero gratitude. Now, after his death, they actually put him on a pedestal. I'm sure that was very comforting for Moses. During his lifetime, they gave him hell. So it's not funny being a leader. I have to give you this reading from Jeremiah 17. Those of you who know your Bible know exactly what I'm going to read. Jeremiah 17, from verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately corrupt. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the mind and I test the heart to give to every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. The heart is deceitful above all things. If you know enough about yourself, you know that's true. And they tell us that so that we will come to grips with this, and that at some stage we'll say to the Lord, save me from myself. I am my own worst enemy. So God's response to them in verses 4 and 5 was that he would pour down bread and food from heaven for them. This is very, very important because this incident is picked up in John's Gospel, and Jesus answers the queries of the chosen people. And this manifestation of food from heaven is a manifestation of God's incredible love and mercy. They can't see it. They can't see that love is doing this for them. It's somebody who is growing and has opened up to the reality of the perversity of the human heart and that nobody is good except God alone, as Jesus himself said. That's when you begin to praise God for his greatness and for his goodness. And that he wanted to show them that he was their father, that he was their father means origin, that he was their provider, that he was their teacher, he was their guide, he was their redeemer, he was their God, he was their everything. And here he is pouring all of this out to them, and they have no ability to grasp this, understand this, as most of the human race today doesn't have either. It is incredible. So what he does is he gives them what the church later called viaticum, viate cum, food for your journey. It is an extraordinary thing. So I just want to comment on this for a minute. The manna was a supernatural gift from God. Now, there are scholars who will deny that because they don't want to give God the glory. There was no manna in Egypt, which is the same kind of territory in the Middle East. There was no manna in the Promised Land. There was no manna in Syria or Iraq, as we call them today. It was nowhere in the area. If manna was normal, there would have been no problem about living in the wilderness. It was a supernatural gift that God gave to them. It lasted exactly 40 years. On the day that they entered the Promised Land, they never again experienced manna. That's why it's via te cum. It's food for your journey. And it represents the Eucharist, which is the spiritual food for our journey all the way to the Promised Land, to heaven. Now, we have our critics, of course, who will say that it was simply, some kind of a substance that was produced by trees in the wilderness. The problem is, where do you get trees in a wilderness? Do you know what a wilderness is? Look for a tree in the Sahara Desert. You won't get it. They want to say that this was a natural phenomenon, but they cannot explain why it appeared all of a sudden, winter and summer. That's not normal for a plant to keep on producing winter and summer. They cannot explain how there was enough for more than 2 million people on a daily basis for 40 years, and then all of a sudden it disappeared. They cannot explain why there was a double portion on a Friday because the people were not allowed to work on a Saturday. They cannot explain any of that. So with all their sophistication, they actually don't make sense of their criticisms at all. Now, you might ask, how big was the miracle, apart from everything I've already said, that there was enough there for 2 million people? We're told in verse 4 that each person, now supposing there's 2 million, each person was to take a daily portion of 1 omer. That works out to be approximately 400 tons of manna. This was no small thing. This was today's best bread today. They were getting fresh bread every single day. It was absolutely fantastic. And where did they find it? They found it all around their campsite. It was literally outside the door when they got up. It was completely accessible. They did not have to do anything drastic to find it. They knew that this was mysterious, and they looked at it and they said, "What is that?" That is manhu. That's where the name actually comes from. So let me read what the Jerusalem Bible says, and then I'll read what the Revised Standard Version says. This is verse 13. So it came about. Quails flew up in the evening and they covered the camp. And in the morning there was a coating of dew all around the camp. When the coating of dew lifted, there on the surface of the desert was a thing, delicate, Now, the Jerusalem Bible says powdery, which is impossible. You couldn't pick up a powder from the desert. As fine as hoarfrost on the ground. But when you read the Revised Standard Version, instead of powdery, you'll get it was flake-like, which would be able to be picked up off the ground. And when they saw this, the sons of Israel said to one another, "What is that? That's manhu." And Moses said, "That is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." And they looked at it. This was very mysterious food. This was something they were never going to understand in their lifetime. And yet, generations later, the people understood that this was an absolutely extraordinary manifestation of God's goodness to them. And this is the Lord's command. Everyone must gather enough of it for his own needs, 1 omer a head, according to the number of the persons of your families. Each of you will gather for those who share his tent. That means you could have 3 generations sharing the one tent. The sons of Israel did this. They gathered it, some more, some less. And when they measured it, an omer of what they had gathered, the man who had gathered more did not have too much, and the man who gathered less did not have too little. In spite of themselves, they got exactly what they needed. And that's extremely important as a manifestation of Eucharist at a later stage. Each found that was what he needed. Moses said to them, "No one must keep any of it for tomorrow." But some of them wouldn't listen to Moses, and they did keep part of it for the following day, and it bred maggots and it smelt foul. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning, they gathered it, each according to their own needs. And then when the sun grew hot, it actually melted. There was completely sufficient there for the whole people, but only for the day. They were not allowed to keep it for the following day because God had said at the very beginning in verse 5, "I propose to test them to see whether they will follow my law or not." In other words, I want to find out if this people will actually do my will. The issue in the entire Bible from beginning to end is, will anybody do the will of God? The people who do the will of God are the saints. And the more deeply you do it, the more deep the sanctity. That's actually just how it is. And what you find is disobedience. They were told not to hold on to it. They held on to it. They weren't allowed to do that. So God allowed the thing to be destroyed. This was mysterious food. And the mystery had to be penetrated and understood. It's described as small and delicate and flake-like, okay? Just like the sacred Eucharist is today, small, white, delicate, round, flake-like, given to us every day. But it doesn't satisfy the body, just as the manna actually didn't satisfy the body either. This was spiritual food. And so this was their problem, that it was spiritual food and not physical food. They wanted something for their bellies. And they weren't all that interested in something that would enable them to grow spiritually as people. And so God wanted them to actually grow spiritually so that they could come to be a people in union with God, and therefore God's will could be expressed fully on the earth and God's kingdom could be established on the earth. But it can't be established with people who are grumbling and disobedient and selfish and self-centered and petulant and all the rest of it. The kingdom can't be established with that. God wants to come into us in union and work through us to bring life and grace and help to others as well. So obedience is the great issue. And you'll find that when we get to Sinai, there's going to be 10 commandments, all dealing with the will of God. Every one of them, the will of God is the issue when you come to God. So verses I read for you, that's verses 16 to 21, about all the grumbling, in which grumbling was mentioned actually 7 times, says that God hates complaints. He hates grumbling. And that's one of the reasons why whenever I've given a retreat, I always say in the introduction that the complaints department is closed We're not interested. We're not interested in a complaints department. God is not interested in a complaints department. Why? Because he said, ask and you will receive, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened unto you. It's so simple to get the solution. Why would you grumble as if he wasn't there? So the grumbling indicates their refusal to recognize his presence. That's why the grumbling is actually a very bad sign. And they grumbled their whole way through the wilderness. Incredible. God is present. He's present everywhere. Psalm 139 says, where can I go from your presence? Where can I flee from you? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I go to the depths of the sea, you are there. Even if I go into darkness, you are there. Darkness isn't even dark to you. The night is as bright as the day. So, self-will, selfishness, me, none of that is acceptable to God. Unfortunately, it's one of the signs of the present generation. And so the hard lesson of the manna is, will you become humble and loving as God is humble and loving? Will you cooperate with his will? Will you allow him to be God? And will you do the very simple thing of communicating with him and saying, give us today our daily bread. He said, ask, you will receive. Listen, you will receive. Seek, you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened unto you. And that applies to every human being of every generation for all time. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht déilibh. Goodbye. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World Podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.